Now you can take the lug nuts off, use a 22mm socket so you can get the wheel off. And grab the wheel, slide it off. I'm going to loosen up the jam nut. Just take a 15/16 wrench and loosen it up. That's good. I'm just going to take a little rust penetrant and just spray down the tie rod stud. That'll make it a little easier to take that nut off. I'm just going to take a pry bar and just pry below the strut and prying down on the tie rod to help the stud from spinning. And then use a 21mm socket, take that nut off. Now just take a hammer and hit on the bottom of the stud going up. And when you take this off, you're going to want to count the threads. So 1, 2, 3, 17, and just write that number down somewhere. That's going to make it easier for when you put it back together to get it close, so that when you go to have the alignment done, it's actually a little bit closer than if you didn't count the threads. I'm going to take some locking pliers and just lock them onto the inner tie rod. And take a 24mm socket and take this nut off. Now you can take this clamp off the boot, use some hose clamp pliers or just some regular pliers and just slide that off. On the back side of this boot there is a clamp. If you just take a long pick and find where the clamp is put together or where it's pinched together, you can loosen up that pinched part. Just spread it apart a little bit and you might be able to slide the boot off. And most of the time you have to replace these clamps, but sometimes if you don't damage them too bad, you can reuse them. And there we go, that's slid off. If you're doing the right side, you can turn the steering wheel all the way to the left. That's going to push this out really far. If you're doing the other side, just do the opposite. And try to get some locking pliers as close to the tie rod as possible. All right, that's good. This is just going to prevent the shaft from spinning and damaging any internal components in the steering rack itself. And take a tie rod remover tool, get the correct adapter that fits. Slide this in position. All right, and loosen up the tie rod. Hold the locking pliers. There we go. Take your tool off. You just do this by hand. There you go. Take the new tie rod end, inner tie rod end, and just apply a little bit of thread lock adhesive. And you can clean these threads out on the rack. Use a little brake parts cleaner and a rag. Just wipe that out. All right, and thread this in. Now you can put the adapter on. And torque this to 74 foot-pounds. Now I'm going to put the boot on. Now my clamp is still reusable, so I'll leave that on. If not, you could always use a wire tie if you have to. Now to tighten that clamp, I have these special pliers that tighten that. So just be creative on how to get this around here. You may have to take a heat shield off if you want to get it from underneath, or you can try to get it in from up here. And if you don't have those pliers and you can't access that, sometimes just carefully using some side cutters. You don't want to cut it, but you can pinch it just enough to lock it on there. Just make sure it doesn't twist, and that's good. All right, and take that outer hose clamp or boot clamp, use some hose clamp pliers, and slide that back on. And that's good. And put the jam nut back on. Now take the outer tie rod end and count the threads when you go on. 1, 2, 17. And I'll just move the jam nut a little closer and take the stud and line it up with the knuckle. Take the nut, put the nut on. Now I'll take a pry bar, go under the strut, slide this down. And then I'm going to torque this nut to 22 foot-pounds. And if you have a angle meter, you're going to want to torque this an additional 120 degrees. If you don't, just do the best you can. That's 90. Then I'll go another 30 degrees. I'm just estimating. It's about right. And we can tighten up the jam nut. And if you have the ability to torque this, you can torque it to 55 foot-pounds. Now put the wheel back on. Now I'm going to tighten the lug nuts down, torque them to 140 foot-pounds in a cross pattern so that it tightens the wheel down evenly. I'll go around again, just double check.